Sergeant Lorraine Bryant, a decorated U.S. Army combat medic, was finally heading home after a grueling deployment. As she stepped onto the plane at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, her posture remained straight, her combat boots firm against the floor. She carried herself with confidence honed through experience, yet her eyes held the quiet weariness of someone who had spent too much time away from home. All she wanted was to take her seat, close her eyes, and picture the moment she would finally embrace her children after months apart. But before she could settle in, she felt the weight of someone's stare. A man seated behind her, dressed in a polo shirt and khakis, narrowed his eyes, his lips curling into a sneer. He made no effort to hide his disdain. As she placed her bag in the overhead compartment and took her seat, his voice rang out. "Figures," he scoffed loudly. "Of course, they'll let just anyone wear the uniform these days." Lorraine ignored him, focusing instead on a small, worn photograph tucked inside her jacket, a picture of her son and daughter, smiling at a 4th of July picnic. That photo was her anchor, the one thing that kept her grounded no matter how far away she was. But the man wasn't done. "I don't even know why they bother," he muttered, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "What's she doing? Handing out Band-Aids. She's probably never seen real action." Lorraine had seen more action than most could ever imagine. She had saved lives in the heat of battle, stood firm under fire, and made life-or-death decisions in seconds. But she had also faced this kind of ignorance before, the kind that assumed her worth based on her gender and the color of her skin. A hush fell over the cabin. Some passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. A young mother sitting beside Lorraine leaned in and whispered, "Are you okay?" Lorraine offered her a small, reassuring smile. She didn't need to defend herself. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. The flight attendant approached, her eyes flicking between Lorraine and the man. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her tone professional but firm. The man smirked. "Oh, everything's fine. Just making an observation. Hope I'm not offending anyone's delicate feelings." Lorraine exhaled slowly. She had dealt with men like him before, men who enjoyed testing boundaries just to see how far they could push. She chose silence over confrontation, knowing that dignity was her greatest weapon. But despite her composure, the blatant disrespect left an ache in her chest. The flight continued, the man's occasional snide remarks lingering in the air like an unpleasant stench. Lorraine remained still, fingers tracing the edges of her children's photo. She reminded herself why she had endured so much, why she had pushed through pain, exhaustion, and fear. It was for them, for her family, for her fellow soldiers, and for the people she had sworn to protect. The next morning, Mark Reynolds sat in his Albuquerque living room, sipping his coffee as the morning news played in the background. It was part of his routine breakfast, scrolling through his phone, catching up on headlines. The anchor's solemn voice caught his attention. "This morning, we honor a true American hero," the anchor announced. Sergeant Lorraine Bryant, a combat medic who risked her life to save not only her fellow soldiers but countless civilians during her deployment overseas. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The coffee cup in his hand wavered as his eyes locked onto the screen. There she was, the woman from the plane. The news segment recounted Lorraine's bravery, the ambush on her convoy, how she had dragged wounded soldiers to safety while under enemy fire, how she had been injured herself yet refused to stop. They spoke of her efforts in remote villages, treating civilians caught in the crossfire of a war they never asked for. One man, interviewed through a translator, spoke with tearful gratitude. "She saved my daughter," he said. "If not for her, we would have lost everything. She has a heart of gold." Mark felt the blood drain from his face. His cruel words from the flight echoed in his mind, each one sharper than the last. "She's never seen real action. What's she doing? Handing out Band-Aids?" The woman he had belittled, mocked, and disrespected was a hero. A woman who had risked her life, not for recognition, but because it was simply the right thing to do. Shame settled in his chest like a weight he couldn't shake. He had always prided himself on being a man of principle, yet he had torn down someone who had given more to this country than he ever would. Mark spent the rest of the morning in a daze, replaying the events of the flight over and over. The way she had sat there, calm and composed as he hurled insults. She hadn't needed to defend herself. She had already proven her worth in ways he couldn't even begin to comprehend. For the first time in years, Mark felt the weight of his own ignorance. He couldn't undo the harm he had caused. His words had already been spoken, his actions witnessed by an entire cabin of passengers. But he could do something. That afternoon, Mark made a donation to a veterans organization that supported soldiers returning from deployment. It wasn't enough, it would never be enough, but it was a start. He also wrote a letter to Lorraine. In it, he poured out his apology, raw and unfiltered. He told her how he had seen the news, how her story had shattered his assumptions, and how deeply, profoundly sorry he was for his behavior. He ended the letter with a promise. You didn't deserve my hate. You deserved my respect, and I failed to give it to you. I will carry the weight of that failure for the rest of my life, but I promise to do better. Thank you for your service, your bravery, and for being a better person than I ever was. Mark didn't know if Lorraine would ever read his letter, but writing it felt like a step toward accountability, not for his own absolution, but because it was the right thing to do. Sometimes, the most profound lessons come not from grand gestures, but from quiet moments of reflection. And for Mark Reynolds, that flight had been one of those moments. It had changed him, because heroes like Lorraine Bryant walk among us every day, and the least we can do is give them the respect they deserve. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul Stories. Let's reach 1,000 subscribers together and continue sharing stories that inspire change and celebrate resilience. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next chapter of empowerment.